all of Scripture operates under this tension between Christ and Antichrist. And on that Good Friday, this is exactly what you see. You have Pilate and you've got Jesus of Nazareth, and then you've got Barabbas. And Barabbas is actually, his first name was also Jesus. And there are manuscripts that support this, that you had two Jesuses being put out to the people to choose. And of course, Jesus was brutally scourged, crown of thorns on his head, and they gave him a purple mantle. They gave him a rod. Interesting. Here's the parody, woman. Here's the parody, that the true king was crowned. The true king was given a purple cloak. The true king was given a reed. And even the Roman soldiers, in mockery, they bowed before him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews." What they didn't realize, and here's the irony, is that they were actually worshiping the true king. They meant it as a mockery, but they were actually bowing to the true king. And then the people were given a choice. Pilate says, "Do you want me to give you Jesus of Nazareth, the one called Christ?" Notice he says, "the one called Christ," or Jesus Barabbas. Now we know his name was Jesus because he distinguishes the two Jesuses by saying Jesus, the one called Christ, or Jesus Barabbas. There's so much irony here. Barabbas in Aramaic means son of the Father. So the murderer had the name Jesus, the son of the Father, Barabbas, and you had Jesus of Nazareth. They had two choices. They had the real son of the Father, the king, the Son of God, or they had the pseudo-king, the son of the Father, Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas. And what does Pilate say? He said, "Who shall I release to you?" And of course, they demand Barabbas. And Pilate says, "What shall I do with your king?" The irony is unbelievable. What shall I do with your king? And then the religious leaders commit an act of high treason. They said, "We have no king but Caesar." That was blasphemy. They rejected their true king and also blasphemed God, who was, again, the Father who appointed his son as king. They blasphemed God by choosing a pagan emperor who was also a pseudo-king, Caesar. They chose him as king over their rightful king, the Messiah Jesus. The irony, again, unfolds in the crucifixion. He's crucified between two thieves. He's in the center, which is the place of honor. That's why at the Transfiguration, Jesus is in the center and Moses and Elijah appear on either side. And the king has the crown of thorns on his head. He has the titulus above his head on the cross, on the vertical beam, saying, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Even in death, he is acknowledged as the king. And in fact, God is mocking them. Now, we don't see it that way. We look at the horror of Good Friday and the crucifixion of Jesus. But if you look at it closely, God is mocking them and saying, "This is my king. This is my son." And he is enthroned on the cross as king. You know, St. Augustine once said that the cross was Christ's pulpit from which he preached his love to the world. And the whole thing, I mean, even his burial, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, if you read the weight of the spices that they brought to anoint the body of Jesus, it was the equivalent of a royal burial. And that's the point. It is the burial of the King of Kings. And then, of course, they buy all these ointments and spices worthy of a king. And then he rises in glory. He rises in glory as the king who has conquered death. So this is why the kingship of Christ is so important. It is so central. And that is how it ends. It ends with the king ruling with his people forever and ever. That's a beautiful promise.
Absolutely. And it's just fascinating how well you broke down the scripture there and show us the depth behind it. I'm always surprised at every time you read, even just the Gospels, there's so much depth. I always hear from atheists, why would God use literature to reveal stuff to us? Why would he do that? Why would he show us this stuff? And I think it's because there's so much depth
Oh, yeah.
to it. And I think sometimes it's just never good enough for people. They'll say, oh, well, it's so deep that no one could ever learn everything about it. And that's probably true. You probably could never learn everything about it. But then on this other side of the coin, if he had made it shallow, then they'd be complaining about it being shallow. So, you can never win.
That's right.
But it's so incredible that that's a central theme. And I didn't even know that about Barabbas. That's very interesting that they're mocking him, but in another sense, he's actually mocking them.
That's right.
So
That's right.
give us some practical advice. What do you propose we do in response to this bankrupt, secular worldview that is just permeated throughout our society?
Yeah. Well, what did Jesus say? He said that we are the salt of the earth and we are the light of the world.